everybody, and welcome back again to what is now the second episode of the Flix Busters podcast. I'm Zach, back again with Sean, fresh off of a really fun discussion talking about Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. If you haven't seen that live video that we posted, be sure to follow us here on the Fandom Empire channel. Fandom Empire presents Flix Busters, and we're so excited to be back talking about a very relevant topic that I really wasn't expecting to be relevant in 2023. And yet here we are. After all of the stuff that took place off the coast of the Atlantic, not even a month ago, maybe less than a month ago, there's just been a lot of talk and a lot of hype surrounding the Titanic. And so that is going to be our topic of conversation, among other things. There's going to be a lot of things that we're covering on this episode, but James Cameron's Titanic is the big issue. And if you haven't seen the podcast before, there's only one other episode to go off of. This main topic of conversation is going to be a movie that we quote unquote put on trial, if you will. And we're going to have 4 key categories that we look at to try to break down and dissect whatever the topic of the episode is. And we'll give our scores, come up with an aggregate, and help you decide whether this movie is a flick or if it's a bust. Hence the name, Flixbusters. Sean, I know you're excited to be back. That Indiana Jones discussion was so fun, but I'm really excited about what we've got for this episode as well.
You know, you mentioned about the Titanic being relevant in 2023. I would argue between obviously what happened with Ocean Gate and the people there, as well as the 4K 3D 25-year anniversary release this year. I would, dare to say the Titanic has been more in the news in 2023 than it has been dating all the way back to, if not, 1996, 1997 area with James Cameron's Titanic, than the documentary him and Bill Paxton did with Ghost of the Abyss, which is highly recommended for everybody.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many different elements about what happened with Ocean Gate and how it maybe even parallels to what took place on the Titanic, and the hubris of man, whether it's in a tiny little submersible or on a big ocean liner, is also one of the topics that we've got on deck for this episode. But being as this movie is a probably one of the best films of the 1990s, one of the other elements that we have here on the program is something that takes a look at a particular genre, and we put you to the test to see what your Flix picks might be. But we're also going to have a rant segment. We're going to have some news and some discussion topics, and then we'll get to the main event and come up with our verdict at the end of the episode. So we've got a loaded episode for you talking about Titanic and all the surrounding elements. But let's go ahead and jump to the multiple choice question, Sean, because this is something that's going to be, this one's a little bit easier than the next question, but this question is going to be for those of you in the chat watching this video. Obviously, we don't have a whole lot of engagement on pre-recorded episodes. We have a lot more on the live episodes. Hopefully you all can join us when we do go live. But this is something that we'd like you to send to us over on our Twitter page, here in the chat. We're going to be putting up other socials as well down the line. What is your favorite James Cameron movie? The options we've got for this episode are Titanic, The Terminator, Judgment Day, Avatar, and Aliens. Sean, this is just kind of an icebreaker to get things started, and then we're going to have probably a much tougher question just on the other side of this. But what would your pick be out of these 5 for James Cameron movies?
Honestly, that's tough, man. I think Titanic is way up there, but I'm someone who loves the first Terminator. I know most people like to flock to the second one, Judgment Day. A lot of people think it revolutionized cinema at the time. I know there's a lot of Avatar fans out there, same with Aliens, but if I had to pick one off this list, I'm still going to go with Titanic.
I find it hard to pick anything else. I mean, Aliens is a great film, but I still prefer the original Alien. I think the first is still the best out of that franchise. And I have seen very little of the Terminator franchise. It was just not something that I was introduced to growing up, and it's not something that I've sought out. And as much as I enjoyed Avatar, I think I enjoyed Titanic more. And we're going to dissect all of that later on in the episode. But I think Titanic is my pick, and it's not just because we're talking about it. Fun fact before we go any further, this might surprise a few people, maybe not to those who know me and have followed my body of work. But in order to prepare for this podcast episode, I actually had to go and watch the Titanic in its entirety for the very first time in my life.
It's funny because you and my oldest son share the same name, and he too just watched the Titanic for the first time in his life. And there's a bunch that I want to dive into pertaining to that, but I'll wait for the Titanic topic. But I will say this. I'm pleasantly surprised that you really enjoyed the film. I don't know. I just got it a gut feeling that you wouldn't. I mean, at least you enjoy it to the level of you picked it over the other four options here. And I know a lot of people would go Avatar. Obviously, you haven't seen T2 apparently, so you couldn't pick that. But I'm happy because I think there's a lot of people that shit on this movie just for the sake of shitting on it, because obviously it's a romantic love story too.
I mean, sure, there's creative liberties, but that's what cinema is supposed to be. And so, yeah, we'll get into that. We will definitely get into that. But yeah, out of these five, Titanic is one of my picks. However, we have another element here on the show that's called hashtag Flix Picks. And we're sincerely hoping that you all start using that hashtag when you're presenting your list to us. We had some really great engagement for this particular topic, and it was really, really cool to see everybody's responses. But the hashtag Flix Picks for this episode, well, are we going to the rant segment, or are we doing Flix Picks? And you're muted, sir.
There we go.
There it is. So be sure to use the hashtag FlixPix. Right now, we're only on Twitter. We're working on getting on Facebook and some other places. But use that hashtag when you're talking about how you're going to spend your $15 budget. We're going to have one of these for every episode of Flixbusters. And this one's going to be a toughie because up there at the top of the list, you've got Titanic, but you've also got Toy Story, Twister, Jurassic Park, Lion King, just some juggernauts up at the top. But then you've got some really great low-key finds in the $2 and $1 region, like The Sandlot, The Mummy, Space Jam, Jumanji. This was a really tough list for me personally, Sean. I don't know how it went for you, but this one was not easy for me.
So Zach and I were talking the other day, and he's messaging me 90s possibilities, and like I already have a few in my head, and his are coming through, and I'm looking at all the movies that I've forgotten, and so I took a bunch of movies off of Zach's list, so he definitely did the heavy lifting on this one. I sorted out the categories, and that was a nightmare on its own right. Like,
I can imagine.
I might put Phantom Menace at $5 simply because it's Star Wars, but truthfully, it's probably where it should be at $3, and then Jumanji at $1. But it's like, look at the films that are above it. It's hard.
But it's Robin Williams, man. That's what's really tough. So we got some great responses on my personal Facebook page, and I don't know if we've got screenshots taken from other social media as well, but I put it out to some of my Facebook friends just to see if they would say anything. And even some Intergalactic Peace Coalition crossovers ended up happening, which was really cool. If you don't follow the IPC podcast, you should. There's a really cool Indiana Jones discussion coming out over there pretty soon. But one of our longtime supporters over at IPC, Joey May, said, if you must buy one at each amount, then I would go with Twister, Saving Private Ryan, Home Alone, The Mummy, and D2 Mighty Ducks. But he said if I can spend all 15, then I'm getting Jurassic Park, Toy Story, and Twister. That's an interesting component because I had to clarify that with you, Sean. I didn't know if that was where we were going or if we had to get something from every single row. And I ended up kind of cheating a little bit, but I'll get to that. Titanic is in there for Chelsea. Titanic is in there for Peter. Jumanji, Sandlot, Mummy, Happy Gilmore, Men in Black, and Matrix. No regrets, says Katie. Dude, get this. That Patsy Arnold, that's my mom. My mom hardly ever contributes to the podcasting stuff that I do, but even she had some thoughts with Lion King, Matrix, Men in Black, Sandlot, and Jumanji. I didn't even know she had seen some of those films. So now I kind of want to watch them with her so that we can talk about it.
Matrix. I can see the other ones, but Matrix in there is a little surprising. That's awesome. Wonder what she thinks of the sequels.
I don't know. I'm gonna have to find out now. Robin had Jurassic Park. That was no surprise. Terminator 2, no surprise. Tim put in the Sandlot. He's a big baseball guy. That didn't surprise me. Space Jam, sports guy, D2, Happy Gilmore. That's like what 1, 2, 3, 4 sports movies plus Men in Black and Batman Returns. Like you can utilize your budget however you want. So even if you get some of the stuff that's on the lower budget, you can kind of maximize your picks, which is pretty cool. Justin had Home Alone. I think that's one of the few Home Alone selections that I see from anybody. But, sometimes you need stuff for the holiday season. So I get it. But that's not all the comments we've got. Kip was saying Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, and Batman Returns, and Scream. Mighty Ducks is on there again. Space Jam, The Sandlot, Saving Private Ryan, and Toy Story. Honestly, Joe, that's a really great list. Even my boss got in on this, dude. John puts 7, Matrix, T2, and Men in Black or Happy G. He says a young Anakin and Jar Jar makes me vomit. Thanks for the visual, John. I appreciate that. Steven Schinder is another crossover from the IPC podcast, longtime contributor over there. Lion King, Toy Story, Scream, Phantom Menace, or Happy Gilmore. Honestly, dude, I think Happy Gilmore is getting a lot more love than I was expecting it to, but that's pretty cool. Jesse with Jurassic Park 3 times. That's hilarious.
Hey, you know what you know, right? Love what you love. Happy Gilmore for me is my favorite Sandler film. So like that's I'm pretty sure, and I need to check my notes and see if I had that. Yeah, I do have that. So I do have Happy on mine as well. I'm not surprised by that. It's a fun movie.
Well, let's go ahead and get into our picks then. What you mentioned Happy Gilmore is one of the movies that you would pick. What else would you pick to fill out your $15 budget?
I just really quickly here want to read what some of our staff put out there for this because they contributed to this too. And we have Randy who chose Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, The Phantom Menace, The Mummy, and Mortal Kombat. That $15 went a long way.
Yeah,
and
it did.
I kind of thought about that too. Like, if these are the only movies you're supposed to watch for the rest of your life, or the only 90s movies you're supposed to watch for the rest of your life, don't you kind of want more options in some way or another? I mean,
it kind of depends on if you want quality or quantity. So that's a really good slate, though. Like if that's the only ones you get, that's a good set.
Ryan had, this is an interesting one. Ryan had Saving Private Ryan, Armageddon, Star Wars, Happy Gilmore, and The Sandlot. A little bit of everything in there.
There's a good mix in there, yeah.
Tommy B, Jurassic Park, T2, The Phantom Menace, Happy Gilmore. Kenny had Jurassic Park, Terminator 2, The Phantom Menace, and The Matrix. And Jesse had Batman, Armageddon, The Phantom Menace, Space Jam, Sandlot, and Jumanji. Again, Jesse's money went a long way.
It did. Mine didn't go quite as far, but I think I'm still pretty satisfied with what I ended up with.
Mine, real quick, were Titanic, Halloween H2O, The Phantom Menace, Happy Gilmore, Scream 2, and Mighty Ducks D2.
Yeah, I mean you're able to stretch it out pretty far. That's a really good setup. I kind of cheated a little bit. I was very, very ready I was very, very ready. If you could put the graphic with the whole list back up real quick. I was very, very ready to go with a clean slate of spending $15 on three $5 movies all the way across the board. I was very, very close to doing that. I was ready to go with Lion King, Jurassic Park, and Toy Story because that's like my entire childhood right there. But I mean, Phantom Menace is also my childhood. Sandlot's also my childhood. So I decided I was only going to get a couple of those, but I did spend $10 on two movies. I went with The Lion King and Jurassic Park because those two are on my list of my top 5 movies that I will never say no to. And so those felt like pretty important things to include. And then I rounded it out with Phantom Menace, Jumanji, and Halloween H2O. I really haven't seen very much of H2O. I don't think I've seen it in its entirety, but I wanted to incorporate a different genre. And I remembered hearing you talk about it before. So I figured that would be a good one to spend my last dollar on. Because after I got Phantom Menace, I only had $2 to spend, and I decided I would get two movies instead of one. So I went with Jumanji and H2O.
It was incredibly painful for me to not pick Seven. Like that hurt.
Yeah. Yeah. Seven hurt. Toy Story hurt. Honestly, Space Jam hurt a little bit. That was also part of my childhood. So it's not easy. And these things are not going to be easy. You're going to hear us bitching about it pretty much every episode because it's not a very easy thing to pick from. But be sure to use that hashtag FlixPix, FLIXPIX, so that the Flixbusters can keep up with all of your picks on all the different social media platforms. Right now, we're keeping it on the local level, going to our staff chat here at Fandom Empire. We're keeping it to some of our personal pages, but it's going to spread. It's going to grow. And when it does, we want to be following that hashtag. So thanks to everybody that sent in lists and submissions. We really appreciate it. And we're looking forward to the next one that we get to talk about. The next one is going to be kind of interesting because we really haven't used this element very much before. And we really are getting lower-ish on time. And so we're going to try our best to keep this to a 2 to 3 minute segment. No guarantee that that's going to work out. But our topic tonight is Titanic. And I thought it would be interesting to talk about it from the perspective of the actual Titanic. And one of my favorite movies is Jurassic Park. Jurassic Park, at its core, is about the pridefulness of man doing something even though science and society and even logic to a certain extent tells you that maybe you shouldn't. And the Titanic was such a grand and expensive undertaking, but it had its flaws. And one of their major flaws was the lack of boats. One of their other major flaws was that the rudder didn't match the size of how big the boat was. It all gets talked about in the movie. So, on this particular segment, we're going to have a 90-second window for each host to go on a rant about something. That's what "Don't Get Me Started" means. We have the opportunity to "Don't Let Us Get Started" talking about a particular topic pertaining to whatever our discussion is. Mine for the Titanic is this concept of the hubris of man when it comes to the Titanic. I haven't really practiced this. I haven't really scripted it, but I'm going to give myself a 90-second timer and we're going to see what happens. Are you ready, Sean?
Yep.
All right. My rant starts now. I kind of touched on it a little bit already. I was talking about how the hubris of man is what the primary storyline is in Jurassic Park. They had this concept. They executed it. They decided to run with it before they had run plenty of tests. This maiden voyage aboard the Titanic had over 2,000 people on it and the capacity to hold less than half. So, yes, I absolutely think that the hubris of man is supremely evident on the Titanic. And I would dare say that this is one of the greatest tragedies in the last century plus because of the hubris of man. Sometimes man gets a little prideful and they get a little carried away. Maybe one or two people dies as a result of it, and maybe it gets explained away. Maybe it gets covered up, but there's very few circumstances in history where man's pride gets in the way and literally costs hundreds of lives. This is one of the biggest blunders in history. Not just like world history. I'm talking about like the history of man. Man's pride has very rarely been so evidenced as what you see on display in the real life Titanic. And thank goodness for James Cameron bringing it to life. But the pridefulness of man is just supremely evident in the loss of life, and it makes me furious. Just don't get me started.
Glad you got your alarm to turn off because mine wouldn't turn off.
I was just watching it tick. I had it on stopwatch mode. I wasn't trying to get it to like go off. I was just like glancing at my phone. How much longer do I have? That's tough, man. 90 seconds isn't easy, but I think this could be a really fun segment depending on what we end up ranting about in future episodes. But what have you got
Absolutely.
for me? What have you got for me?
You want to time me up? I'm not going to be looking at my time. So
Yeah. And then I'll do like a 10, 9, 8 or something like that on the screen so you don't have to look at your phone. But your 90 seconds on the hubris of man involving the Titanic begins now.
if you don't know your history on the Titanic, there's a lot that's in James Cameron's movie that is truthful and legitimate and factual. Um, the Rose and Jack thing, that's a Hollywood story. I know there's people that like to twist that and try to glorify it and make money off of it. And it really kind of upsets me because despite what you think of the love story, and I quite like it. I think it's one of the better takes on a love story or a romance story in cinema. That being said, if you're shitting on the movie because of that, let's remember that it was real, living, breathing human beings that made the decision to not have enough lifeboats on board for the people to get off safely. It was real, living human beings that controlled the situation horribly when it went down, and you had lifeboats that had 12 fucking people on them. It's a joke. So when you're bashing this movie or bashing, the love story, please remember innocent women, men, and most importantly, children died because of men's ignorance.
And with 8 seconds to spare, that kind of made up for the 4 or 5 seconds that I went over. But there is a lot of truth in what we both said, and I think it'll be really fun to see what kind of tangents the folks in the chat want us to go on. That's another thing that we're going to put to you, the listener, is if you want to hear us go on particular tangents, whether it's about the Titanic or any other subject, then be sure to hit us up on social media. Use that hashtag FlixPix. Join us in the chat. Join us on our live episodes. And maybe we'll find a way to incorporate one of your rant subjects here on Flixbusters. But that don't get me started segment can sometimes be a little longer and sometimes be a little bit shorter, depending on how much time we've got. We're still working out the kinks of our timeline, but I think we're plugging along quite nicely. And it's time to go into a news element talking about the box office issues in Hollywood. Sean, I don't even know where to begin. I kind of want you to take the lead on this because I might end up going on another rant again, and this isn't the time for it.
So for me personally, there's a lot going on right now in cinema, and there's a lot of opinions out there, which is that should be expected given the it's a form of entertainment that we all love, and I mean that's the reason we're here doing this podcast is our love for movies, right? So it is a lot to overcome though when movies are losing hundreds of millions of dollars. It's a ton. And when you take what's going to happen with Indiana Jones, it's just look at where it's tracking and what it needed to make. If you look at even Ant-Man, that's right, Ant-Man. There's another one. There was 4 big blockbuster movies. There's more than 4, but 4 specifically.
It was a lot of them. It was Lightyear. It was Elemental, a couple of Pixar films. It was the live action Little Mermaid. and it was Ant-Man Quantumania. Those were the four big ones. I think they had a combined budget with production and marketing around 800 to 900 million dollars, just under $1 billion to make those four movies, and they're not tracking anywhere close to making that.
I wonder if that is including marketing or not, because Indy alone, mind you, Indy was filmed during the pandemic, and that alone raised costs. But Indy needs to make somewhere between 700 and 800 million worldwide just to break even, and it's not going to do it. So my
No,
question to you,
no.
I haven't watched this documentary in a while, but if you go back and watch An Empire of Dreams, the making of the original Star Wars trilogy, they're talking to a lot of studio executives during that, and they talk about Star Wars and how successful it was when it first came out, and obviously it was a massive blockbuster and the first one since Jaws at that point in time. But the other big thing they talk about is it happened at the right time as the landscape of cinema was changing. So my question to you now, man, is do you think we're at a point where the 200 $300 million without marketing costs budgets need to go away? Because in my opinion, you do not need that to make a successful film nowadays. And I also think the over reliance on CGI in a lot of films is rubbing a lot of today's audience the wrong way.
I'm really torn, if I'm being honest, because there, like you said, um there are some movies that you don't need a huge budget for, and there are some movies that maybe you do need a bigger production budget for. And I like there are some horror movies that you can make on, $4 million or something like that. And it can turn around and make you 20, 30, 40, and you're making a really big profit. But then you take a look at some of the other big blockbuster films, and maybe they do need a little bit more help in order to be the type of movie that they want that film to be. I want to use Top Gun Maverick as my example because it had a fantastic 2022, but it had a really big budget. And to take a look at, a worldwide income of $1.5 billion, um, like that is a fantastic time at the box office, and the entire budget for it was 170 million, just under $200 million. And so it made that much, and its marketing budget back domestically, and everything international was just gravy. And then you take a look at something like Quantumania, did not do that well. Probably had a bigger budget. I'm not going to look at it because I don't want to get distracted. But I think part of it has to do with what people's interest level is. I think part of it has to do with how it's marketed. I think part of it has to do with the timing. Is it coming out in the summer? Is it coming out in the winter? I think some of it has to do with the fact that there is a very tight microscope on films, and you hear about all of the delays and all of the reshoots that happen at something like Dial of Destiny. The word gets out about the CGI of the opening sequence, and we talk about that in our previous episode. Um, Sometimes when the press leaks things and when things get out, it ends up hurting the performance at the box office. So I don't feel like Elemental deserved to be like the next greatest Pixar thing, which is what they were trying to pitch it as because it was an original storyline. It's not Lightyear, it's not Toy Story 4, it's not Cars 3. You're not getting something from another franchise, and it's like, "Oh, it's an original film. It's great." But just because it's original doesn't mean it's great. So, it's a really nuanced situation that I wish we had more time for, but I don't think blockbuster films are necessarily at risk. I think it's about the scrutiny, and it's about timing, and it's about marketing. Top Gun Maverick apparently had the perfect marketing, had a great budget, hit all the right notes, hit the sweet spot, turned a profit. But that hasn't been the case for every movie. And so I'm not saying everybody needs to copy Top Gun Maverick, but I am saying there are some people that have the formula figured out and some people that don't right now.
I'll end with this. I just think, and this is just my opinion, that audiences today want to see stuff that looks real and stuff that they can be immersed in. I think there's an over reliance on CGI, and I bet if you watch the box office closely over the next couple weeks, you'll notice a movie that's not going to struggle. Tom Cruise again, Mission Impossible. You watch, we're not going to be talking about that film losing money.
Well, it's interesting. Maybe people are just really on board with a particular actor right now. Maybe there's somebody that really really wants to see a particular person in it. I'd be really curious to see what Barbie's numbers end up running. It's been marketed really well, and it's not really something that I have a whole lot of interest in seeing, but I think it's going to do well at the box office as well. So, again, it may just be on a case by case basis until we figure out who's got the right formula and who doesn't. Unfortunately, it feels like Disney right now doesn't have the right formula to keep pumping out the hits that they have been. Maybe they need to have fewer of them so that people get a little more excited when they do come out, or maybe they just need to change their approach. I think the other movie we were thinking of was Strange World. I think Strange World was also a huge flop and had a really big animation budget. So
So was
when
the
you
Flash.
and so there's just a lot of stuff that hasn't been going well for them specifically, that I don't think it's indicative of the entire industry. So, but
Alrighty.
what do I know? I don't know. Let us know in the chat and let us know on social media how you feel about this issue. Is it a systematic problem or is it an isolated incident? Hit us up over at Flixbusters. All right. It is time to finally get to our main discussion topic. And I don't know exactly how much time we're going to have. We'll try to sort it out as best we can. But it is time to talk about James Cameron's Titanic. And can I just give some initial thoughts, seeing as I just recently watched it all the way through for the first time?
Yeah, I'd actually love to know how what you did for your viewing experience.
I didn't do anything special. It was on Netflix here in the US, and I just popped it open, and I watched the first half all the way through, and then around the time where there was supposed to be what I would consider the intermission, like if you were watching on VHS tapes or if you were taking a break in the movie theater, it's about the place where you would probably switch video cassettes. I got up to walk around a little bit and go to the restroom and grab a caffeinated beverage, because it's a 3 hour long movie, man. That is a long, long film. And it's interesting that, like, the final hour of the film is basically taking place in real time. If I recall looking at the trivia correctly, like as soon as the ship hits the iceberg, everything else, the events are happening essentially in real time. And I thought that was fascinating. I thought it was very, very interesting storytelling to take it from like a few cut scenes here and there, kind of jumping around over the course of 48 hours, 72 hours, to now being immersed in the story in real time, was really, really cool. The words that I came up with for this film was beautiful tragedy. It is a beautiful film. It is fantastically made. It has some great cinematography. It has some really great scene transitions. It has some great, great acting. It has wonderful set pieces. It has a great contrast looking at like first class versus third class passengers, going from a very pristine observation deck to the greasy and messy boiler room. It's really, really interesting to see how Cameron takes all of those elements and puts them together into one film. And to use it as a way of telling Rose's story, it as a giant flashback, was something that I really wasn't expecting, but I really, really liked it too, because it puts you in the quote unquote present by looking at adult Rose, but then it also takes you back and draws you in and immerses you in the story, and you know how it's going to turn out. If you're a history fan, you know how this is going to end. You know that this is not going to end well, and yet you still enjoy the different elements that are happy. You still enjoy the different conversations that take place between first and third rate passengers, and you all know that it's building to something, that it's going to culminate with something, and what it ends up culminating with is just so visually breathtaking. When the ship splits in half and the back end is straight up in the air, like, that is as near perfect of a visual representation of what actually happened to these people as you could possibly get. And it made me want to look away at times. I knew it was a movie, and there were times that I still couldn't watch somebody falling to their death off of the back of the boat, or sliding down the deck and not being able to stop until they crash into a wall or just fall straight into the freezing cold water. It was it was breathtaking at times, and it was beautiful, but it's a tragedy. So, my thoughts on this film, it is a great, well-made movie that I can best describe as a beautiful tragedy.
I think that's very poetically put. Um, it is a very hard movie to watch. I have a hard time with this. I have a hard time with Pearl Harbor. I have a hard time with Schindler's List. They're all movies that are, um, covered in realism and real events that happened in people's lives that were tragically cut short. Uh, One scene that gets me all the time, and I can't not bring it up, is the mom and the kids, where she tucks them back into bed because there's no way out for them.
And she's
And
just telling them a story, right?
it's just, even now, it's devastating.
Yeah.
Um, and also, let me point out, I love the fact that you gave James Cameron his due, because he can be looked at times as a bit of a control freak, and I think you'd have to be to put out the
Bro,
movies that he has.
bro, I read on the IMDb trivia that there were 150 extras in this film, and he met with each one personally to give all of them their own individual backstory so that they could method act in the background. This dude wrote it, directed it, produced it, was the editor behind the scenes. Like, he did all of it, and he did it so well. It's crazy.
There's a lot of people that wonder, and I mean, I'm not the biggest Avatar fan by any means, but there's a lot of people wonder, well, why the hell do these movies take so long to come out? They could come out way quicker. Absolutely, if it was someone else doing it. But James Cameron is going to do things the way James Cameron wants to do, or he's not going to do it. It's that simple.
Yep.
Um, I, so I discussed with my fiance, um, if we could just show Zach the ship sinking portion of it, because I didn't know if he could sit through a 3 hour and 15-minute movie. And we went back and forth, and I ultimately came up with the idea that, maybe that's not a good idea, because the movie is literally designed, and I don't know if you noticed this, but every single place that we visit in the first hour or so of the movie on the Titanic gets revisited again during the sinking. Every
Yep.
single location and shot. And I
Yep.
thought to myself, if you're going to really appreciate not just the movie, but understand what these people went through, I think you need to see the whole thing. And he did. And he actually really enjoyed the movie. He thought it was really well done, but it was also sad, right? Because
Sure.
1,500 people just gone.
It's crazy, dude. It's crazy because at one point they mentioned that there are 2,200 souls aboard. So from the captain to the crew to the stewards to the passengers, everybody that's aboard, there's 2,200. And according to historical documents, only 706 get saved. That means only 32% of people survived this shipwreck. 68% died. That is a tough pill to swallow. And it gets depicted so incredibly well during that last hour of the film. But you're right. This movie is supposed to be about Rose and Jack. And you witness this ship's downfall from their point of view. But all of the different people that they encounter, every single character, from Jack's old friends that kind of snuck aboard at the last minute to all the people that they had dinner with after Jack saves Rose. Um, all of those people at the big round table, you return to all of them and witness their fate over the course of the film. And it's so crazy to see how it all plays out. And I love the cast. This is a fantastic cast. I was not expecting, like, I obviously knew Kate Winslet and Leo DiCaprio, like, obviously. But Kathy Bates, who plays Mama Joe from The Office when Saber takes over, she is in this film. Victor Garber is in this movie. And then the captain of the ship goes on a few years later to play King Theoden in Lord of the Rings. So like this cast is absolutely fantastic, and there are elements of this movie that I can absolutely see both being inspired by previous films. A lot of the very fancy upscale set designs feel like they were inspired by some of the grandiose sets from a movie like My Fair Lady, but then some of the costumes and some of the behind closed doors matchmaking, families being broke and needing to be rescued type of thing, that's very much in the vein of what Netflix does with their show Bridgerton. I've been watching that with the wife recently, and so it's not only been inspired by films, but it's also inspired other pieces of cinema and television afterwards. And so the impact that this movie has made is not just financial, but it has had repercussions that have affected it before it got made, and has affected productions that got made after it.
The cast for this film, yeah, like you mentioned, is fantastic. I don't know if you mentioned Billy Zane being in it. The late Bill Paxton, obviously playing Brock Lovett. Jonathan
Paxton was
Hyatt.
Paxton was a big get. I haven't seen Billy Zane in a whole lot, but I appreciated his performance here. He was he was 2 bricks shy of a load.
Oh yeah, that's an understatement. Based off a real character too, or a real person too. His character in the movie is someone who was actually on the Titanic, and his story in general is fairly accurate to what happened. I also thought the Jonathan Hyde plays Bruce Ismay, who is, along with Thomas Andrews, responsible basically for the construction of the Titanic. He's the guy who I'd love to say cowardly, but I think until any of us are in that moment, it's hard to know what we would do. But the guy that sneaks off on the boat, the lifeboat,
He stows away at the end. Yeah,
there's actually a complete history that you can be found on the internet of that man being talked to by the Senate and his actions after the boat went down. Ooh. And he admits to not looking back, and it gets real. It gets heated. So if you're ever wondering what repercussions he suffered after the fact, definitely go check that out. But back to the movie in general, Matt. Like, I have not watched the making of the Titanic ever. It's something I want to do. And by the way, I want to take a split second here just to give Dean Renner a shout out. You can check out the two main physical media versions of Titanic that are available right now. If you have one of those fancy 3D TVs, you can grab that, or you can grab the 2-disc Blu-ray. It might actually be 4 discs though. I think it's 4 discs, which includes the film, reflections on Titanic, a bunch of commentaries, 60 minutes in behind the scenes featurettes, and 30. Zach and I were talking about this before the show here. 30 deleted scenes. How long was this bloody movie supposed to be? I can't wait to finally dive into all that, man. But I got to tell you, there's a lot of people that also crap on this film because they go, all I want to see is the last half an hour of the movie where the ship sinks. Well, if they tell you that, you know they haven't watched the movie, because the ship sinking is for more than half the movie. Just by a smidge. It hit the iceberg just before the halfway point. So it's remarkable. It's breathtaking. I'm I don't know if you're claustrophobic, man, but as the Titanic is filling up with water and Rose and Jack are, specifically when Rose is alone going through the hallway there, like, even though it's an action movie, at that point in time, there's people. You can't separate the two, or at least I can't separate the two, knowing that, well, Rose might not have went through that hallway. There were living, breathing people who were going through that mess, and that's it's a tough watch.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And what's really interesting to me is there's a lot of loose wires, because electricity obviously was a brand new concept over a century ago, and there's a lot of sparks flying and stuff. I can only imagine that with that much loose water going throughout with those live wires, it's not something that Cameron depicts, but there are times where I've wondered how many people just got electrocuted because they're on a metal boat with water and live electrical wires falling apart as the ship falls apart. Like, I have to imagine that something like that happened as well. And so to have all of those things, along with certain people feeling like they have nowhere to go, they have no options. Um, there was a very rich person, I think it was Mr. Guggenheim, who decided that he was just going to face his fate like a man, and he's all dressed up. He's not going to put on his life vest. He's just going to sip his brandy until life takes him. And then that mother, like you talked about, there's that old couple that is just cuddling in bed. They've decided they're not going to try to make a run for it.
So check this. We have to mention this. I might actually have to call for Jay. I don't know if do you know the story behind the old couple?
I do. I was setting you up for it. No, dude. I was setting you up for it.
Jay to know it. So you just deliver it now.
I was leading into it, but I am fairly certain that couple was actually aboard the Titanic. I'm fairly certain that
okay. So I don't know if the people they show in the movie are aboard the Titanic, but we did know. Sorry, I was looking at something.
They're okay, so they're based on a real couple.
So the wife of the CEO of OceanGate, the thing that just went down, though that couple is based off of her. Is it grandparents or great grandparents? It's either grandparents or great grandparents, which ties the whole thing together even more in a very disturbing way.
Yeah. So I'm confirming on the internet, because I got my facts turned around a little bit. I should have done a little bit more research on that. I apologize, but that older couple was based on a real couple, and I believe they were descended of that real couple, and those actors in the film have their own grandchildren and descendants, and like you said, the actress's descendants are people who were a part of what took place in OceanGate. So it's really, really odd and kind of ironic to think about how it all kind of comes full circle to go from actual death aboard the Titanic to an unfortunate circumstance that took place near the Titanic. It's just the way it all circles back around over the course of a century. I wonder how long it's going to take before people decide to leave that sunken vessel alone. It's got some bad mojo, man.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of what you believe in or whatever, 1,500 people, man, kids that had next to no chance of surviving. You've gotten pictures. You've driven submersibles literally through the thing. Leave the people in peace.
Let
Like,
them let them lie.
so I got to ask before we go. I know we got to do our scores here and get going. I was shocked you didn't see this movie until we watched it. It's a movie that gets some hate, but for the most part, when we're talking about critics, a lot of people consider it a very good movie, close to a masterpiece. I'm just wondering if it lived up to the hype for you.
Yes. In a nutshell, yes. Um, when I finished it, I wrote my wife and I said that's probably the best movie I've seen all year, and it wasn't even made this year. Um, and it doesn't necessarily have a high rewatchability factor just because of the tragedy that takes place aboard it. But I think I'm putting it up there with movies like V for Vendetta and The Lives of Others as some of my favorite well-made movies. I think there are some movies that are just cinematically fantastic that maybe you can't watch over and over and over again. I could rewatch The Lion King time and time again and enjoy it. I can rewatch Jurassic Park time and time again and enjoy it. I think after a while, like you said, the claustrophobia and the emotions that rise and fall with this movie are just so much that I don't think I could watch it over and over again, but I find it to be a fantastic piece of cinema, and I think it's gonna be evidenced in the score that I give it.
So I've seen it twice this year. Once in theaters, once just at home for this episode. But before this, I hadn't watched that movie from start to finish in 10 or 15 years because it is a hard watch.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually had tickets to go and see it during the re-release, and some stuff came up and we weren't able to go. And I'm kind of sad that we missed it now because the next time it does have a re-release, I am definitely planning on going.
Not a big 3D guy, man, at all. It didn't bother me in the movie because it wasn't overused. And seeing this thing on big screen was just, in an IMAX, was my favorite movie experience of this year in a movie theater.
That's amazing. That's amazing. Well, unfortunately, we do need to try to wrap it up a little bit. Let's go ahead and get into our scores, and I'll kind of describe the scoring process to folks, taking a look at things like creativity, quality, sound, and enjoyment. You see my scores down there. I'll explain them in a moment here. Creativity has to do with the story of the film itself, how it was written, and how the characters play out their story. Quality has to do with the production, the directing, the acting, maybe even the CGI. Sound is going to include things like sound design, the soundtrack, and the music. Those are two different things. Sound design is like how things sound in the film. The soundtrack is something like what Guardians of the Galaxy has. It's the stuff that is like actual songs that are playing, like Hooked on a Feeling. The music would be how the film is composed. And so there's like different components of the sound. And then to round things out, there's a possible 25 quote unquote bonus points based on the enjoyment factor. So I give it a 23 out of a possible 25 for creativity. Obviously, I took off a little bit because it's got a couple of fictional characters in it. It's based off of a real life tragedy. It wasn't like a completely new concept. It was just something that James Cameron took some creative license with. But the way that he made it earned it a total of 25 out of a possible 25. The production, the sets, the costumes, the way everything falls apart at the very end, the contrast of the upper and lower class, the way that different people face death and embrace death, or try to fight it for as long as they possibly can. It is a well-made movie. I took a couple of points off of sound because I noticed the in the musical score a lot of the returning underlying theme that is the Celine Dion "My Heart Will Go On." I heard it at least 6 times, and I probably only needed to hear it 2 or 3. So, I did take a few points off of that. But then my enjoyment factor, like I said, is really, really good. It's a roller coaster of emotions, and I enjoyed the ride a lot. But the only reason it's not a 25 out of 25 is because I don't feel like I could rewatch this film time and time again just because the story is so tragic. But it's very, very high marks across the board. Very little points taken off, if any, depending on the category. And when you add it all up, out of a possible 100 points from those 4 different categories, my score came out to be a 91 for Titanic.
I was really worried before I knew what you thought about this movie that your scores weren't going to be great. I know there's a lot of people out there that hate on this film, and I don't understand why. I agree it's a tough watch for sure, and I'm definitely not going to go watch this thing 2 or 3 more times this year. Might watch it once more, just simply looking at the extra features and stuff. But yeah, my scores are very similar to yours, man. I gave creativity a 25. When this movie was made, it changed cinema. It's the set design alone is remarkable. The acting's incredible. The ensemble's fantastic. There are well-known actors and actresses in this movie that get just, a minute or 2 of actual screen time in the final film, but they're there because of how big the film was. The quality was 25 out of 25. I gave the sound 23 out of 25 for the exact same reason Zach did. As much as I love that Celine Dion song, they go back to it a little too frequently. It would have been nice if there was another main theme with the movie, as if it was like a 2-theme movie, so you had something else to go to instead of constantly going back to that one. And my enjoyment level is a 21, one lower than Zach. And simply, it's not anything the movie does at all, and it's not the movie's fault. It's simply what we've talked about numerous times tonight, and that is it's a tough watch. 1,500 people lost their lives on people's ignorance, and a lot of them innocent children who would not have been able to do anything about their fate, and that makes it a tough watch for me. I hate thinking about those things, even when it comes to forms of entertainment. It's not great to just take in, even if it wasn't a true story, but it is. But that brings our overall scores to Zach at 91. I was at 94, which gives the Titanic a 92.5% on Flixbusters.
185 out of a possible 200 points from the two of us. I'd say we both had some pretty high regard for this film, and it's deservedly so.
Well, so highly regarded that look what it ends up being. Our first film.
I can't dispute it. I cannot dispute it. This is something that's going to be gradually incorporated over the course of the show. It's something that is a mutually agreed upon pick, which is slightly higher than a flick, and it has to have a score above 90 on the grade scale. So this is a movie that we both really, really enjoy. We both had really high marks for it. And because it is over 90% aggregated score between the two of us, it is eligible and is hereby inducted into the Flixbusters Hall of Fame. There'll be plenty of others that end up in that Hall of Fame as well. We may just do like a Hall of Fame episode somewhere down the line where we just talk about the ones that need to be inducted, even if we haven't discussed them yet. But that is going to be best saved for another episode. But But suffice to say, this is absolutely a flick. The verdict is in. And on Flick versus Bust here on Flixbusters, we say that Titanic is a flick. And it's not far off from what the Rotten Tomatoes score is. Is this the audience score, Sean, of 88%?
No, it's critic.
Critic score, well, that's fair. We're critics. We gave it slightly higher marks than what the critics do on Rotten Tomatoes. But I'm curious what kind of a score you all would give it based on the 4 elements that we talk about. Those are creativity, quality, sound, and the enjoyment factor. You can have a possible 25 points for each, and I'd be curious to see what everybody else's scores would be for Titanic. Thank you to our producers, Randy, Matt, and Shannon. We've got some really great people that help out behind the scenes, and we appreciate them as well. Sean, did any of them have anything to say about the Titanic before we call it a night?
They did. Let me pull it up here. We're having some technical difficulties on this side over here.
And that happens. When it's the first couple episodes, you're bound to have a couple of hiccups along the way.
Matt said probably one of the greatest cinematic masterpieces of all time. And I think Matt and I usually fall on the opposite side of the fence when it comes to films that aren't in the Halloween franchise. But we're pretty close on that one. Randy added in when he first saw it in theaters, he felt like he watched something epic. The setting, writing, acting all drew him in. 25 years later, it may not hit the same as it did, but it is still an iconic piece of cinema. I would say for me personally, it probably hits more than it did back then, just because I was so young and I have a better understanding of the entire situation now.
Well, and being a parent, it's a little more personal too when you're seeing children suffering the fate of adults because of prideful rich people who didn't give a rat's ass about the lower class or children. It's heartbreaking and gut wrenching to see, and infuriating at times, probably if you're a parent. So I definitely see how this isn't something that people would want to watch time and time again, and maybe it gets dated a little bit as time goes on, but not by much. Okay, well, I think we finally reached the finish line for episode 2 of Flixbusters. Let us know if you think this movie is a flick or a bust in the comments below. Be sure to hit like and subscribe so that you can have alerts for when hashtag FlixPix and Flixbusters comes back here on Fandom Empire. But I think that is going to do it for this episode. If you want some exclusive content that is not just Flixbusters related, but has a lot of really, really great perks, you can find that Patreon/Fandom Empire as well. But I think that's going to do it for this episode talking about the Titanic on Flixbusters. For Sean, I'm Zach, and we'll see you all next time.